From 2017, we ran some surveys around companies in South Africa doing change management. 70% of people said that the number one issue that they have with leaders is trust. Scary, right? So 7 out of 10 people said that I don't trust my manager.
Welcome to another episode of Boardroom Conversations, the WATPROP business podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us. His name is Alvin Govender. Alvin is a specialist in change management, leadership coaching, as well as motivational speaking. Alvin has assisted many corporates in the South African context with various leadership and change management strategies. Today we'll be specifically speaking about leadership and change management in the South African context. We hope you enjoy this boardroom conversation. I'm your host, Justin Watkins. Just a quick one, before this episode begins, please like, share and subscribe. We're on YouTube and Spotify. Please also follow us on our LinkedIn page to keep up to date with the latest episodes. Alvin, thank you so much for coming on to the Boardroom Conversation, the WATPROP business podcast today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I know you've spoken to thousands of executives and people that are in senior leadership about transforming their organizations and leadership and change management and a variety of other topics that are within, obviously, the corporate sphere. But ultimately, what I would like to speak to you today about is your personal journey, ultimately leading up to starting Awakening Leadership, and then just your wise words in terms of various things regarding leadership, the struggles of leadership, purpose, empathy, change management within organizations post-COVID-19. And a variety of other topics that we'll be discussing. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Justin, I'm really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to sharing. I've been involved in leadership and peak performance coaching now for 14 years, so I've got a lot to share. Over that time, I've covered almost every aspect of business, the challenges that a business faces. So in this time, I would like to share as much wisdom as I can on these topics.
100%. And just as a starting point, just to give the listeners an understanding of who we're speaking to, just give us an idea of your background from a personal business journey perspective, ultimately building up to starting Awakening Leadership.
Yeah, so many people don't know this. They know it now in the last year because we've been running some ad campaigns where I've shared that I was a school teacher that got into the boardroom in business coaching, and it was a wonderful transition. But many people are surprised by that. So I spent 13 years as a teacher. That was the start of my career. And Awakening Leadership started in a classroom where I felt in education, there was a lot that we were not doing in terms of we were telling children to study, students to study, but we were not showing them how to study. And the how-to for me was what I wanted to do. It wasn't in the syllabus. We wasn't giving marks on that. So to find my own creative way of building the minds of students, because I believe that everything started in the mind and in the soul of a child for them to achieve success. And that's when I got into leadership, actually. And from that space, I developed these programs for students. And my desire for leadership and studying leadership started much earlier. But what I found was I had all these leadership tools now that I was going to share with my children in a classroom. And then I had such a passion for leadership. And I would share this. A friend asked me, he heard me speaking the one time, he says, we're having a conference. Can you come and share this with my leaders? So these were adults now at one of the banks. They were having a conference. And there were 200 people in the room, and I shared this. And 200 people stood up at the end and started clapping. And I said, okay, I think I'm onto something. And people are liking this. Let me invest more in that. And this was around 2006. And from there, I started to build. I realized I'm still working with children in a way. It's just that they've all grown up. Yeah. And I think the one thing for me is, why is this important? So from the age of 16, Justin, I think and this is very interesting, is I found that I wasn't achieving success. It's always the black sheep. I was struggling with basic things that other people my age were getting right. So I was lacking a lot of confidence. And then I realized that if I needed to be different, I needed to invest in myself. So from the age of 16, I started reading and studying leadership and leadership principles for myself, for my own growth, not for anything else. And that's when I realized I had a desire for this. My one question that I asked was always, why are some people successful and others not? Because I was not going to be successful based on the trajectory that I was going. So I studied leadership at the age of 16 because what can I do differently? How can I think differently? I was reading Think and Grow Rich at the age of 21. I was reading Stephen Covey at the age of 18. I was reading the Bible, the Quran, anything I could find at that age. Because remember, it wasn't really available in the 1990s as it is now. So whatever I could find in terms of leadership, I was just reading. I think that's where the journey into leadership started. And in 2008, I started Awakening Leadership. The business failed in 2009 because I was teaching as well. In 2011, I re-registered again, failed the second time. Sure. And then in 2013, I went, okay, if this is going to be a success, I need to give up teaching completely and focus completely on this. And that's what I did in 2013. I said, it's only going to work if I give off 100%. And I resigned from teaching in 2012. In December, in 2013, Awakening Leadership was formed for the third time. And we've been going very strong since then till now. So but that's the journey.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to hear, because oftentimes our plans fail, oftentimes because we're distracted by plan B and not putting all our focus into plan A. I've seen that in my own life personally. When there's a distraction away from the plan by which you're trying to go on, oftentimes there leads to a failure on both, because you can't ultimately have both at the same level and same intensity. You can only truly have one at the same level of intensity.
And I'm not asking anyone to just leave whatever they're doing. I'm just saying, but the fact that I was still holding on to the one job meant that I did not have faith completely in what I was doing. And the day that I decided to go, worst case scenario, it fails and I go back. And that's the mindset that I had. And keep in mind that friends and family thought I was crazy, because I failed twice. And I'm not just talking about failed as in tried and gave up. I'm talking about invested a whole lot of money and it didn't work out. So if you fail twice and you go the third time and you think even bigger, then something's wrong with you. Hey, Alvin, you know what? This thing didn't work out. What are you doing? You're giving up the one thing now that is a secure job. And I think that's where I lost a lot of the relationships in my life. But in my heart, Justin, I think I had this vision of, okay, I think I'm onto something. It's hard to explain to anyone. But any successful business owner listening to this right now knows it's hard to put your foot on what this is. But there's a voice inside you telling you, this is where you need to go. And I think I heard that voice and I followed it. And every successful businessman for me knows that, and had that moment where they thought that this is what I'm meant to be doing. So that's the story. And when I got back into it, I think it didn't happen overnight, obviously. I think it started off very slow as planting seeds, and then it's going to be one of the biggest leadership movements in the country. But it's been a journey.
For sure. And in terms of some of the clients that you have worked with over the years at Awakening Leadership, just shed light on some of the clients that you've worked with in terms of in which you've guided them from a leadership point of view.
So I started off with one of the big mining companies. I think when I started off, I think that company taught me a lot. So I was sitting with their leadership and working, and I learned a lot from the leaders there. And working in mining is a lot of people issues. There's a lot of mental health issues. There's a big spotlight on health. And that's when I started to learn some principles of, it's not just about a company making money, it's about taking care of your people as well. So I started off in mining, and then I went into banking. And I transitioned into the banking world where it was very driven by, performance and achieving. And people would work until burnout to achieve results. And then I got both sort of ends of the spectrum there. And then I went into insurance, and then pharmaceuticals, working with, and what I found was now we've got companies in almost every different sector. And what we find, people ask me, how do I operate in different business streams? They're completely different. And that's where we find that the leadership components, the things we're going to be speaking about today, is generic to all different businesses. If you apply these principles, you'll get success in every single industry. And that's where I think the CEOs of different companies kind of are willing to hear, how are these other businesses running change? How are other businesses doing their strategy? What can we do differently? And I think that is why I'm more welcomed into the boardroom conversations now, because of the wealth of experience. But every single company that I worked for, Justin, has given me the experience that I've gained now. There was not a single time where, even if I had a bad experience, it's helped me to become bigger and better. And now primarily I work with executives in a company. We look at what their strategy is and we roll out interventions from the top right down to every level of stuff.
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, because we're so resistant to change naturally, and we don't like change just as human beings. So what makes, is it a tipping point that a company reaches that it ultimately approaches you at? Or is it, what ultimately is the spark or the attractiveness of desiring leadership coaching? Because it's something that we often wouldn't grab hold of because we wouldn't think we need it. So what is that like? What is that thing that you...
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I'll never forget, before, I don't know what happened post 2017 or post 2018, but before that you had to explain to someone what you do. I take quite a length of time telling people, I'm a performance coach. Okay, what is that actually? Now you don't have to. And the reason for that is people know that they need the kind of support that they need. Yeah. Right? So you said we don't like change, right? And that's true. There are people that you can't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning for that reason because your brain got used to sleep. So we like comfort. But do you know that there's some people, and we know that they're about 15 to 20% of people in business love change. They thrive in change. They're looking for change. And those are the people that become successful. So can you be existing in 2025 as a business if you don't like change? The answer is no. So that team of business people around the table need to go, how do we drive positive change in this business? Because if we don't exist. And what I do is I assist with some of the discussions. For a restaurant owner to be sitting now and going, what do we do differently? How do we change what we're doing? It becomes a way of expansion. So that's where we are right now. Why is that the case, Justin? Let's explore that a bit. The world is being owned by disruptors. We know that. One app on your phone can wipe you out of business. Right? We've seen that with WhatsApp. We've seen that with many different businesses. They just come in, they thrive with disrupting the market. The clients that we have are becoming, I don't want to use the word lazy, but they don't want to be inconvenienced. So if you're doing business the way you've always been done, if you're a bank and you don't want to change, you're not going to exist in a few years. If you're an insurance company and you don't change the way you're engaging with your clients or your brokers, you're not going to engage. So I'm getting a lot more of a need now. People are seeing my value because I'm forcing them. When I come in, they have to have these discussions. They can't be in a comfort zone if you're sitting with me because I'm going to ask you those tough questions. And that's when we start to put the strategies in place.
For sure. And obviously when you're trying to lead an organization through change and ultimately becoming perhaps more agile in that sense, and you're trying to become an agile organization to take your business into the future, that often requires good leadership. And I think there's probably a gaping hole in that area, particularly in a lot of organizations in the South African context, where I wouldn't say it's poor leadership. I would just say it's a leadership that's channeled incorrectly. So just on that point, in your experience, how would you define leadership in a business context?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So a leader is someone who can drive a vision, drive themselves or a team towards a vision. So if you take away a vision, there's no leadership. So what's the vision of, if you just look at the Springboks rugby team, they went and won the last 2 World Cups, right? And the number 1 rugby team in the world at the moment. In that 70th minute, Justin, when everyone else is getting tired, they become more energized and they win the game. Why? Because we heard Sia talking, right? They say because we're not playing for ourselves, we're playing for all South Africans. So in that 70th minute, when their body is giving up, they think, and Sia said this, we think about the kid in the township and they get that extra energy. So every leader listening to this today, this is not fluffy stuff. Think about it. If your vision is focused on money alone, then you don't have a vision. Because money is a great reward, but it's not a driver. So if money is so if Awakening, my goal is to get to 10 million rand every quarter. If that's my vision, you sense that and you pushed away. So there's not a vision, that's a goal. My vision is to drive leadership and coaching to every African person, to become the biggest leadership movement in Africa. That's my vision. It gets me up in the morning. So leadership is connected to vision, and vision leads to inspiration. So the companies that thrive have a vision. Now leaders, a leader is someone who knows what the vision is and is able to communicate that. Now take a political party, Justin. I don't want to talk about politics, but we all loved a political party, whether it's in South Africa. We're driven by their vision in the 80s of freeing a nation from apartheid. And what happened in 2010 and 2020 to the same political party? It became corrupt, or the vision was there, but the focus shifted to self-empowerment, enriching the self, getting rich. We forgot what the vision is. The vision was to free Africans, or free South Africa. And when that happened, people saw that and it created destruction. So if you take any company and you take the vision away, it leads to chaos. So if we are inspired by someone that takes us to that vision, and we are put off, or we want to run away from someone who's focused on just themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's a sense in which leadership and purpose go hand in hand, but it's not seeking something to be achieved where it's kind of focused on the company in a very isolated sense. There's a bigger picture at play, and there's a greater purpose. The example you used of the Springboks, the overarching banner above the Springboks is that there's unity, and there's the whole of South Africa is behind them in a sense. Yeah. So leadership, true leadership within an organization ultimately stems from the reality of driving people towards a place that's ultimately far greater than themselves. Yeah. Why do you exist? You exist not to ultimately accomplish your own selfish desires, but it's ultimately that you're ultimately trying to achieve something far greater than yourself. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm understanding what you're saying, is that leadership stems from a place of leading people to a place where it's far greater than themselves. It's something beyond themselves completely.
Absolutely. And they get excited by that vision. I'll just share with you something quickly. There's a book called A Man's Search for Meaning. I think every leader listening to this. Yeah. If you haven't read that, put it on your list now. And don't even wait for next year. Read it now. Read it today. It's going to take you 45 minutes to 1 hour to read it. Viktor Frankl wrote A Man's Search for Meaning. It's one of the most powerful books ever written. And you remember? He said something. He said the survivors, and just to summarize very quickly, these people were trapped in a Nazi concentration camp. The worst place you could have existed on this planet ever was in this concentration camp, because the goal was to strip you of your dignity and do things to you where you lose this ability to feel human again. So they made you feel as small as possible. And what did Viktor Frankl say in this book? I was maybe 25 years old reading this. He says he came in, he was a doctor of psychology, but they put him to work in the camps as a doctor. And he says there would people come in with the smallest injuries, Justin, and they would die. He says because they've given up all hope of living. There's no reason to live. So they would die. And he says there's some people that should have died, but they kept going. Sure. And then he wanted to know why. His reason to find out why the survivors survived was A Man's Search for Meaning. It gave rise to that book. And he said, his words in that book was, those that had the ability to see beyond the walls of the concentration camp survived. They found a reason to live. And there was one man that said, my wife might still be alive, so I need to stay alive in case I get out of here. That was his reason.
Sure.
So any business owner listening to this, what do you communicate to your staff about who you are and why you exist? That inspires you. Firstly, if you are not inspired by that, go and find another job. And I don't mean this disrespectfully. 100%. If you don't love property, then you can't be inspiring your team. And I know I sound harsh sometimes because I tell this to people. If you're not coming here at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, excited to get to work, then find another job. But everyone goes, Alvin, it's a Monday morning. I'd be like, but I was a school teacher. I love these kids so much. That's where creativity comes from. You spend more time at work from 8 to 5. If you add up all those hours, you spend more time in your work than you do with your own family member. And that's scary. So if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're not going to enjoy life.
There's a great quote that says, you can often tell how driven and how excited your employees are of how they feel on a Sunday evening.
Yeah.
So on a Sunday evening, if they're like, oh, it's a drag, I have to go to work tomorrow, then they're not being driven by something greater than themselves. They're ultimately they're just seeing work as a means to an end. It's a means to the weekend. It's a means to the life that they're trying to obtain. Instead of work being something that has purpose and that it has meaning, that it's something far greater than yourself.
So I'll tell you experience. I always get this. People sit in a 1 hour seminar with me. The feedback that we get is that it's too short. They say it felt like 15 minutes. And it's because of my energy. For me, there's such an, like this podcast. I'm so excited that I'm going to be sharing by the way, it's just you now. I'm not focused on the thousands that will listen to this. For me, it's you are in front of me right now, and I'm adding value to you, and I'm so excited by this. I'm not going like, oh, this is 5 sessions today. I need to get this over because I've got to go to my next appointment. Because then there's something inside me that's going to make this very painful. And that's what work is for a lot of people. And we've taken that away and replaced it with, I need a job because I need to get paid. I don't work for money. I attract money. I just do what I love, and money comes as a result. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's
Many people don't get it,
yeah.
Justin. They just tell me, Alvin, come on, man. You come to work on a Monday. I'll be like, guys, you go run on. Imagine Cristiano Ronaldo run onto a soccer pitch and go like, hey, I hate this, man.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate kicking. I've been kicking the soccer ball for 10 years now, 20 years now. I'm tired of it. He'll never be where he is today if he had that attitude. There's a love like it was still. This is like still the first day for me, where it's totally it's passion. I love what I'm doing.
100%. And there's a passion that drives your ability to speak to people, and that passion is ultimately meant to be in fueling a purpose within an organization, and that leads me to my next question: is going hand in hand with having this overarching banner of purpose within an organization and giving people the bigger picture. How do you do that, understanding that there's so much resistance from people? How do you almost inspire people? What are some of the tools that you've seen have been effective in organizations to drive people to change and embrace a bigger purpose for themselves?
So I think every leader, every business owner, the vision of why you exist is important. And then from there is with the basics. We can't forget the basics. The basics is your SMART goals. You go out and create your targets. You got to start educating the public about what those needs are and who you are. Remember, you are a product at the end of the day. You are like what I'm doing now is needed by South Africans. So you got to come back into vision, but then there's a belief. What's your belief? Truly, your belief attracts people to you. So if you're working in a business and you don't believe that you are this person or the quality is great, then it's going to be translated in. Now, the one thing we need to understand, Justin, is that you're not good. If you look at any success story, and you've had some very powerful people sitting on this chair, am I right?
Yeah.
If you had to point me to one person that started day one and went right to the end, to the journey of running their successful business without failure, I would say I'd like to meet this person today, because I've not sat with someone yet that is not experienced. I'm telling you now, I failed twice. We're completely bankrupt and started again. I don't think I've met a single successful person that has not had failure. So what we need to start educating people on is that suffering and failure is a part of your journey. Now, what's your strategy? So go into 2025, you are going to experience failure. I know it sounds like, hey, this is a motivational speaker, but it's causing trouble here. Yeah. You are going to experience failure. Now, what's your strategy? The second rule is, let's go to 2024, 2023, 2022. In the last 2-3 years, let's look at where we failed. we're probably going to fail like that again. Let's go take learning from those experiences and make ourselves better. So take your vision and expand it into the market. Let the world see who you are. Don't be scared of that. But you have to have belief in the center of that. Now what you do is you keep going until someone hears you. So I did about 300 sessions before I got to the level of a CEO. I'm not joking. That's a lot. So I did about 300 sessions to employees, sometimes it was free work from 2008 right to 2013. Before I finally got into the room where a CEO was. If I take away the 300, firstly, I would not, if I was in that room on day one, they would probably not call me back again. It's because of that wealth of experience and those failures and those learnings that got me into that room. And when I was there, they saw my value and they continued. So there's many people want to get to the top and be an executive coach, or in your case, attract that high clientele. But we're not prepared to walk that journey that humbles us sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll answer the question.
For sure. No, for sure. No, 100%. And I think oftentimes is that in terms of going through that journey, it ultimately, not only for yourself personally, but one, we must also convey to people the idea of empathy, is that when they are going through the tough times, like yes, 2025 may be a tough year, and 2024 may have been a tough year, and people may be going through something that's very traumatic, and the purpose, yes, we're trying to get to an end goal, but how do we get people to the end goal? By one, building trust with them, because no one's going to go with you if they don't trust you. Yeah. And also secondly, how do you go to the destination and learn from the mistakes, but also being driven by empathy? Because you almost have to, the two have to go hand in hand. That trust and empathy go hand in hand. They must trust you, but they'll only trust you if you're empathetic towards them. If you're not empathetic towards them, they're not going to trust you. It's just the reality of how human nature works. So it's how do we lead people with trust and empathy and being sensitive to what they're going through, but still not necessarily just leaving them where they are, but ultimately allowing them to rise to potentially the potential that they do have. There's a book called Hidden Potential. And the fact that we all ultimately have this hidden potential in and of ourselves, but we need to understand that people draw out that potential in us. But how do we draw out potential out of people with empathy and trust?
So I love the book, by the way. So my company I kept the name Awakening Leadership, and below the logo it says Inspiring Infinite Potential. The core belief of Awakening is whatever you need, you already have inside you. The process of what we're doing is to bring out that. So it's not that you need to learn something new, it's to bring out that greatness. So that's what hidden potential is. It's not outside of you, it's inside you. What you're searching for is inside yourself. Success, wisdom, love, it's there. If we've forgotten it. So Justin, to come back to your point on trust and empathy, so we've done some, as a coaching company, we do some surveys. We've got a team that goes in and does either it's a written survey or we interview staff. From 2017, we ran some surveys around companies in South Africa doing change management. 70% of people said that the number one issue that they have with leaders is trust.
Sure.
Scary, right? So 7 out of 10 people said that I don't trust my manager. So trust is, do you trust me? It's a bad question to ask in a live podcast, Gerard, but do you trust me? And our answer will be, let's assume it's yes. So you trust me for 3 reasons. Number 1, I don't know if you know this.
No, I don't know this.
Number 1, my character. So subconsciously, it's very deep. Character is very deep. It's 2 notches lower. So you sense me with the first day I met you, and you sense me now. It's like, okay, there's something about this guy I like, and that's your values. So based on my values, we trust a person. So you might meet someone and you come back to the office, you go, hey, something about that guy, I'm not sure. Yeah. That's your soul speaking to you and saying values are not aligned. So if our values are aligned, you'll trust me. That means, and values comes from character and it comes from intention.
Sure.
And that is why if you have corruption in a deal, you might get the deal, but there's something there that's keeping you awake.
That's made it go sour, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen many companies, well, we know with the history that we had in the last 10 to 15 years, corruption was rife in certain companies, and you felt the energy throughout that business. It's hard to put your finger on it, but it's almost like a virus that was spreading in. Even though people didn't know their leadership was corrupt, there's an energy in that business that you can feel. So the second reason you trust me is another C. It's competence, and that's linked to skill. So character is values, competence is skill. That means, can I actually talk? Does this guy, can he actually answer the question? Is he as experienced as he said he is? So it's your level of skill. So you might like me because, okay, this guy can actually back it up, or you might not trust me because I don't have the ability. And there's some people in a leadership role that got there, but they don't have the skill to do the job. And that is why the employees don't trust them. I mean, you think about it. If you employ someone that can't do the job, now you go, okay, the trust is affected. And the third C, so you're going to remember this, the 3 C's. The third C is consistency. And that means treating everyone the same. And the other reason is to not only do it on one day, but do it consistently. Now pick anyone listening to this, pick any leader that you really trust. And you'll see they have character, they have competence, and they're consistent. And those are the people that we kind of look up to. And that's trust.
Sure.
I want to go on to empathy, but anything you want to add?
I wanted to just add what you were saying now is super insightful, especially with when we bring people through an organization. Oftentimes what we do is we train them in the task that we desire them to do. So let's say, for example, it could be software development. So we're training them in software development. We send them on courses for software development, and they become very competent in software development. But as they get better at software development, they're going to ultimately start climbing the ladder in terms of their seniority. Yeah. So they're going to start either go from an intern software developer to senior software developer to the guy that oversees the other software developers. And the problem is we often don't train the employees to manage the staff when they get to that senior level. So what happens is we train them in the task, not the leadership role that they'll be fulfilling one day. So by upskilling someone, we're putting them on the trajectory of going high up in the organization, but we're not equipping them with the necessary skills that are required to ultimately lead the people where they once did that job.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
So in banking and in mining, we found that was a big issue. I think it's a problem across sectors. So you promote the person that had the highest level of skill. So if you spend 5 years, 10 years as a software developer or an engineer, then you got promoted as line manager, and then you worked your way up. Yeah. And then now you find you're sitting at a level of VP, but you don't have the people skills. It's a real problem in South Africa, globally, but it's a big problem here because we sort of rank people based on their technical ability. And any leader listening to this, or business owner, we need to see leadership as a separate skill, although it's integrated. But I have to measure you, Justin, based on your technical skill, and then say, okay, you as a leader and your people skills, how do you measure there? We can't just we have the assumption that the person is can lead, but it's a totally different skill. I mean, I had to spend 13 years as a teacher to learn my EQ skills. I always tell any CEO of a company, you've got to spend at least 3 years as a school teacher, because what happens is you can't teach EQ. Go read Daniel Goleman's book on EQ. By the end of it, it just tells you what work you need to do. Your emotional intelligence is on the same level. You go do a course at UNISA and you study. Your EQ didn't change. Yeah. Your EQ only grows when you start to engage with people. So it's a real problem.
Sure, and that leads directly into empathy. So let's chat about empathy, because empathy is very much an emotional intelligence trait, and it's something that's incredibly entwined in emotional intelligence. Is that the ability to be empathetic towards someone ultimately it measures your emotional intelligence in a sense. It's a good measure of emotional intelligence, how empathetic you can be. So let's just chat about empathy within the leadership context, but also within like leading organizations, particularly moving into change management.
So if we rank all the aspects of leadership that a CEO would need, empathy is one of them. And empathy would be the muscle that's worked the least. We've proven it.
Sure.
So for a CEO of a company, we took 20 attributes that he needs to lead this business. empathy will be his weakest muscle. And only 1 out of 10 in every people have learned what empathy is. And I have empathy, but it's like me saying I'm strong, and then you go into a gym and you see there's a dude that's stronger than you. so it doesn't stop. That's EQ for you. There's no level. So even if I say I'm a professional speaker, listen to this guy Alvin, he's a great speaker, and then at what point do I say, okay, I've reached the max? It's never going to happen, because that's the first thing to understand about empathy. Now, Justin, I think the one thing we need to know is that all of you define empathy for yourself right now. Define it. And the first thing you'd realize is you got the definition wrong. So empathy is not hugging people, it's not just caring for people. Those are elements of empathy. The one definition that I love came from Chris Voss, and he wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. And he was
excellent book.
Oh, by the way, it's the one book that it's my number one book so far that you need to read. If you had to ask me to choose 10 books, number one on that list is Never Split the Difference.
It's a brilliant book.
So you're a reader, it's a good thing. Yeah. You're a good leader there. So one of the things he said there is empathy is seeing the world from the perspective of the other person. Now let me repeat this, right? Empathy is seeing the world from the perspective of the other person. Now if you're a leader, it becomes a business strategy. Now let me explain. Can you see your business from the perspective of the client? Just think about how powerful that is at the moment. So how is your client experiencing your business? What are they feeling? Because where you are seeing it from the perspective of your boardroom chair. There's a banking CEO that doesn't know the answer to that question. There's an insurance CEO that doesn't know the answer to that question. So how are they experiencing you? If you're a restaurant owner, what is your client experiencing? Can you see that it's a business tool? Because then you can see, okay, this is what we need to start fixing. And I know we do these surveys at the end and you punch into this, we've gone all fancy with those gadgets, but try and experience that world from that perspective. Now let's look at employees. The employee is sitting on the desk from 8 to 5. What is that employee experiencing? What is your sales team experiencing? Empathy means experiencing that, because from there you can only change a business from empathy. And that is why tactical empathy is now a buzzword on LinkedIn. So what does this mean? It means sitting with your sales team, sitting with your IT team, sitting with your HR team, and experiencing them. And what happens, that is why we say empathy is the easiest way to build trust. Because Justin, if I was working with you and I spend one day a month where I'm driving around with you and experiencing the world, we connect on a deeper level.
Yeah.
And you cannot grow your business properly if you don't have empathy. So it becomes business strategy. Is that making sense?
No, 100%.
I'm summarizing a whole chapter of a book here.
No, 100%. And I think that ultimately comes into, through empathy, ultimately changing your organization with change management, because you cannot change an organization without being empathetic and understanding that, because on one hand, change is very difficult for people. So how do we become empathetic to people while changing the organization to ultimately become a greater organization, a better organization, a more customer-centric organization, a more employee-focused organization? It's ultimately leading through empathy. So just on that, I mean, change and change management is, I mean, they're probably buzzwords in business nowadays, and I think a lot of the time it kind of just gets thrown into the corporate mumbo jumbo in terms of words that we use. So regarding change and change management, I mean, where do you see organizations needing to change? What are some of the holes that you're seeing that organizations, particularly in the South African context, need to be aware of from a change management point of view?
Well, 80% of our clientele is large businesses, right, in the country. And we work with some of the biggest mining companies, the banks. So some of them have 20,000 staff, 30,000 staff. So the biggest challenge that we find now in 2025, right, if you look at if you look at the motor vehicle industry, it's being disrupted. So if you're a car company, if you're not evolving, it's scary to see what can happen, right? So if you look at the technology space, the phones, everything that we're doing, everything, there's an evolution that's happening right now. So we call it change mastery. And change mastery is where we strategically look for opportunities to evolve. And the word is evolution. How do we evolve our business? And think of ways of not waiting for some business in China or India to come in and completely derail us, but innovating. And now to go back and look at where our business is and what we need to start doing. And then we create that vision for ourselves. So every business that we're working right now in the last year has looked at, and the word here is, how can we become more efficient? So even if you're an individual listening to this podcast, how can I become smarter in the way I'm doing things? What are my goals? What's bringing us the most money? What's our vision? And how do we focus on our business and adapt our business so that we focus on what's giving us the best return on investment? It's going to be hard conversations to have. So if you're a leader now, 2024, 2025, you got to know how to take your business to the next level. And the next question becomes, when you've defined in a boardroom, in a safe space, we sat here and we've decided what this company needs to be and what we're going to do. Now, how do you communicate that? The biggest problem that we have in South Africa is leaders don't know how to communicate change. They struggle. They only communicate when they have information. But if you don't have to give them details about the project and what it's going to look like if you don't know. But you can sit your team around and say, there's a risk if we don't evolve, and this is what we're looking to do. Can we have some input? What are your thoughts? And that's going to build trust. If you cannot communicate that, and that's where the problem is. I'll just share, okay, before I share the story, but your thoughts on that?
What I was going to say is, what I find so interesting about change in particular is oftentimes when you have a vision for an organization and we're desiring to change in a particular direction, what we often find is that organizations have where they're trying to go is almost unattainable in a sense. They have this like great big vision for the organization, but the problem is people can't digest it. I remember reading a Harvard Business Review article about this, and what the gentleman was talking about is that if we want to create a purposeful statement for an organization in terms of changing the organization, we have to try and create perhaps a statement in which we can head in a particular direction that's palatable for people, that they can look at it and be like, okay, that's manageable. The example he gave was basically making New York the safest city, one of the safest cities in the country. And the head of the department basically said that we're going to go street by street, suburb by suburb. So each internal department was like, okay, I'm just focusing on my little suburb. I'm just focusing on my little area. So by each person focusing on their little area, it ultimately formed the greater statement to become obviously one of the safest cities in the US. And I think that's often why we struggle to change, is that perhaps our vision statement for where we're trying to go as an organization is too far-fetched. It needs to be palatable for people to be like, okay, we can achieve that next year, we can achieve that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And when it's too far or too up in the clouds, it's just like rainbows and unicorns kind of stuff, then people, they can't manage themselves appropriately. When they can almost sense that they can achieve it, then it makes change far more possible within an organization, I believe personally.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that is, we found success principles, and I was a very vision-focused guy. I want to get my body fat to 12%. And then at some point it became like unrealistic, it's like, and then I realized that's not how your brain works. So your soul is driven by a vision. So you've got to have that vision, right? Like making New York the safest city, getting my business to where it needs to be. But do you know your brain takes action when they can see small, tiny steps? So getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and your shoes and your gym kit is there, that is enough to get me motivated to the gym. So if a leader has a vision, communicates the vision, but a good leader can break that up into tiny, achievable steps and say, this is how we're going to do it. If you haven't thought that out, then there's a chance that it's not going to be achievable. I've had a good guy that said his target was 250 million for the quarter. And the sales team went like, hey, they all walked out of the room saying, this is never going to happen. I hate these fluffy meetings. I sat with him in 2 sessions and we broke it down. The next time we went in, we did a presentation. He said 250 million, this is how we're going to do it. And you should watch the ideas flowing. They went and they achieved the target because this guy had the ability to break it down. When I was teaching, I realized something, right? You would like a kid that's 8 years old, you're not going to teach them physics, metric physics. Some smart guy designed the syllabus to go in steps. By grade 5, you achieve this. By grade 6, you achieve this. By grade 7, you achieve that. By the time you're in matric, you would know physics. But we broke it up into chunks. And by achieving the chunks, we get the vision. The problem, Justin, is where we have the work, but it doesn't align to where we want to go. And that's called crisis management. We respond to all the emails coming through. And what fire do we have to put off today? And that's one of the big issues there that we're facing.
And I would love to just chat about disruption in business. I mean, obviously, leadership is crucial. Trust and empathy is crucial. Change and change management and managing organizations and people within an organization is crucial. But one, how do you prevent yourself from being disrupted? But then, on the other hand, how do you become a disruptor? How do you lead in such a way that you can protect yourself from being disrupted, but also become a disruptor at the same time?
Yeah.
What experience have you seen with organizations in South Africa where, because of good leadership, it ultimately allows the organization to almost shift in such a way to, instead of being disrupted, they almost become a disruptor now? I mean, maybe you can just share anecdotes.
I had a group of guys that call themselves disruptors. They'll be like, we are in the tech industry, we disrupt. I'll be like, well, what's a disruptor? Like, what is it? And no one could give me an answer. And I told them something. I told them, firstly, you got to understand what your client is looking for. Firstly, right? Secondly, you got to understand what your client is not looking for, but will want in the future. And they looked at me and, okay. Because I'm thinking off the cuff here.
Yeah.
And the third one, which is the most important, is find the shortest, easiest way to get that result. Now, 2000, I don't know when Facebook was started, but let's say in 2005, no one knew what Facebook was. So no one knew what they would get addicted to. It didn't exist. But someone was there sitting, Mark Zuckerberg was thinking, well, people are going to respond well to this. And he created it. So we were all sending SMSs, and some guy thought, let me create WhatsApp. We didn't know we needed WhatsApp till we had WhatsApp. And that's what it is. It's understanding the psychology of a person. That's what disruption is to look at what people will get addicted to or need before they even know that they need it. Sure. And that's
frightening.
So you got to be so into the future. You got to use the highest, best part of your brain to create what will be needed in 2030 and invest in it now. And you got to be clever. Sure. We have our thoughts about Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and all these guys, and Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, but these guys were doing something before their time. So I don't like people just calling themselves a disruptor because they create chaos. Yeah. Because any company you go to, I'm a disruptor, I'm a thought leader. I'll be like, what are you actually doing? Because it's being so much into the future and seeing what people will need before they even need it. And that comes from literally, you can't have any other higher form of empathy. So you got to be so in tune with your rational brain and so in tune with your client. You got to be next level.
Sure. So I mean that's a great segue into if a young person had to come to you and say, Alvin, I'd love some advice. I'd love to start a business. What advice would you give to a young person looking to start a business in South Africa?
How young will they be?
Maybe fresh out of high school, maybe in varsity,
yeah,
something like that. Or even someone that's in corporate right now. I mean, someone that can be in corporate, they've been in corporate for many, many years. Just someone that's looking to start a business in South Africa. What type of advice would you give to that person?
I always tell people the first thing you're going to understand is, I'll give away my age now. I'm 47. And I've had to be patient. Starting this at the age of 33, 35, I realized there was a lot I didn't know. And if I could only be a little bit more humble and have a mentor at a young age, I wouldn't have got into the mess that I did when I did. So I have to be patient to understand by the age of 45, this business is going to be at its peak, but I'm only 35. I've got to walk this journey. So the first step to any young person is, depending on the industry, you've got to be patient. And in that time that you're not yet achieving your goal, or it's not at its peak, you've got to get a mentor. Find someone that has walked this path. And I know we got the technology and all that now, but remember, business, Justin, is still old school. It's still relationships. We're all doing business on our phones. But insurance, if you look at the insurance industry, it's the one thing that's not changed. It's still primarily relationships. So find the 60-year-olds, find the 55-year-olds, and go and learn from them. Because they've got another level of resilience that we've not learned yet. So my first advice to any young person is, go and join network forums, get a coach, get a mentor, find someone, and learn from them. If you're not hungry, you can't be in business. And I mean this. You can't be working for a paycheck. You're waiting for the 25th to get paid. That's not business. Business is, I think in property as well, you're going to see the results in 10 years from now. Most people are not patient enough for that. So you got to have, Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit. I think it'll be second on my list. And what she said was, we can now predict success. We can predict whether someone's going to be successful or not. Whether it's Ronaldo, whether it's a school teacher, whether you in business. I can predict whether you're going to be successful in 10 years from now. How will I do that? She said there's two things you look at. Number one, your passion. How much do you love what you're doing? So any young person listening to this, how passionate are you about this? The second one is your ability to keep going, even when times are tough. So when you fail, like weirdly enough, I was doing this without reading these books. I would pick myself up and keep going. So it's passion and perseverance. If we measure you on both, we'll know whether you're going to be successful or not. So I think a young person, rather than focusing on getting a business, becoming successful, making more money, try and figure yourself out first. Figure out what you love. Do the work now, and that work is self-awareness. I will attract success because I know what I want. I know what brings me joy. And sometimes we get into the field of work based on, we haven't figured those stuff in yet. Remember, I'm going to say this again. Money, it comes as a result of you following your passion. Money is not the vision. As I'm following my passion and doing what makes me happy, I attract money. So it's not just about getting wealthy. Warren Buffett said this to a school of graduates. I don't know if you remember this. He said, right up to the age of 35, keep your mouth closed and learn.
Sure.
He says, because you're only going to get real wealth after the age of 40. I don't know how true that is, because it might be different for different people. But what he was basically saying is, keep your mouth closed, man. Stop fighting people too soon, but focus more on acquiring knowledge, because that becomes your investment. And then you become unstoppable.
Sure. And on that note, I mean, if you had to leave our listeners with any final advice for business and entrepreneurship in a South African context, what would that advice be?
You know what?
I know we could be here for an eternity, but
Yeah.
just one or two final.
Yeah, my final thoughts is, we put a spotlight in South Africa on the negative stuff, the crime, the government, the corruption. I think I'm not just saying this, Justin, but we live in the best country in the world, man. We are such a resilient nation. You look at the people that rally together in the rugby matches. You look at how I was in Cape Town on the weekend and I met some tourists and they said, this is by far the best country in the world. Sure. This is someone visiting. We don't realize what we have here in terms of opportunity. I know we have our rough times, but if we can pick our heads up and look forward and look for the opportunities, I promise you'll find it. It's not easy. It's never meant to be easy. But like right now, the 10-kilometer radius that we are in, we're living in the wealthiest part of Africa. You know that, right?
Yeah.
So there's more money circulating here than anywhere else in Africa. So if we don't see opportunity, I know when my plane is always landing in Joburg, it's not my plane, I don't reach there yet, but I'm coming in and I'm flying in and it's coming in and it's night and I look over and I just see the lights over Johannesburg. I'll be like, I tell myself mentally, all I see is opportunity. I don't know why, I only see opportunity here. And we don't lie to our brains and tell ourselves, and this is not a lie, but the lie becomes the truth. I met you, and from that, my business grows. Every person you meet is an opportunity to grow your brand. And my last final thought, Justin, is the one thing that keeps me inspired in my lowest moments. Even Tony Robbins says he has a bad day at least 2 days a week. And I'll think to myself, okay, I don't have to be motivated all the time. I just need to learn how to pick myself up. That's all. And being positive is about picking yourself up. The one story that changed my life was Nelson Mandela. And if you didn't hear this, it's a treat for you and your listeners. This story is in a book. In fact, we must get it here in the boardroom, right? It must be here and have it open to that page. On page 211 and 212, there's a story that everyone needs to go back and read. The reason why I told you this page is because it's going to be hard to find. Nelson Mandela was in prison. And he used to write letters as a form of therapy. He wasn't writing it for anyone else. They were not allowed to speak to other inmates. So they were not allowed to talk. So the only thing that he could do was write. And he'd write his thoughts. This story is on page 211. That's what I'm about to share with you. Sure. And it's something that I read when I have my low moments. He just finds out, I think it's in around the 90, he was in prison for about 6 years at the time when he writes this. It was in Kroonstad prison, not Robben Island. The guards come in to tell him that Winnie Mandela was arrested and she's going to they laugh at him and says, your wife is going to be joining you in prison for life also. So he has the tears. His beloved wife, beloved at that time. He just finds out his beloved wife. Just picture you in that scenario. You just find out that your wife is arrested and he's going to be sent to prison. And he goes back and he writes a letter to Winnie Mandela with tears in his eyes. And that letter that he writes to Winnie Mandela is on page 211. Sure. And that's what I read when I'm having my low moments. You know what he tells her? He said, incidentally, you may find that she just finds out she went to prison. And I wonder how she responded to this letter. But he says, incidentally, you may find that the cell is an ideal place to discover who you are. Sure. He's telling her, this is the place, perfect place for you to discover who you are. When you live in the world, you get distracted. When you live in the world, you focus on external things for your success. Your possessions, your title, your wealth. In the cell, in this prison cell, the only things that become your possessions are your strength, your courage, and your fortitude. In the end, you'll realize these are the things that matter anyway. These are the only things that matter. It's your inner character. It's the only things that last. You flip the page around. I'm skipping a bit of it because I want you guys to go and read the rest. And then he says, if for nothing else, if the prison cell doesn't give you anything else, it's going to give you the chance to discover who you are, because sometimes in the real world, you'll never have that opportunity. Spend 15 minutes a day, every day, reflecting. And he uses the word meditating. Spend 15 minutes a day meditating. It'll help you to discover who you are. Focus on what you are, who you are, and your strengths, but also focus on what you could have done better. And for anyone listening, that's the best bit of business advice I can give anyone. Because when I go through a difficult time, I'll be like, okay, this man lost his entire life, was living in a prison cell, and he told on the Oprah show, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. So when I go through a moment of trouble, I'll be like, okay, God, you're making me into a better business coach, because 5 years down the line, I'm going to be talking to a business owner about some crisis. And I've been through every issue, whether it was legal, financial, whatever. So when I sit with someone, I lead with empathy because I have truly been there. Every problem that you're going through is an opportunity for you to become stronger and better. You just got to get around the pain and take out your flip charts and write down, okay, how do we become better from this? Use that as an opportunity for a reflection. But Justin, you're right, we can talk the whole day.
Sure, absolutely. And Alvin, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your insights and your words of wisdom that you shared with us today. And I really appreciate you coming onto the show today. Thank you.
I loved it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate that.
We'll have many more, Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.